I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school.
This is a circus. The consequences will extend long past my nomination. The consequences will be with us for decades.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Let's turn our attention now back to the story the whole nation is talking about. The testimony today of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and a woman who is accusing him of sexual assault, Christine Blasey Ford. Both of them testifying today before the Senate Judiciary Committee in an emotionally charged hearing. Joining me now to break down today's developments is Danielle Chalakian, a reporter and columnist whose work appears in the Daily Beast. Also with us is Douglas Wigdor, an attorney who has represented multiple clients in high-profile sexual harassment cases. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you. And Danielle, you were watching some of this here in our newsroom. I've been talking off and on with my wife and with other women. And I get this sense of both anger and familiarity with everything that's transpiring here. But you're not old enough to remember the Clarence Thomas hearings. What is going on here, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not old enough to remember the Clarence Thomas hearings, but I've actually been researching them a lot recently for writing purposes. So I'm pretty familiar with them now. I mean, I think the issue is that whether or not you were alive or paying attention in 1991, you probably have had some experience, some kind of dehumanizing experience as a result of your gender. And, you know, what I wrote about today for the Daily Beast was that watching her, I mean, she's a little bit younger than my mom, watching her tremendous amount of grace and poise and the way that she really tried not to cry and was so conciliatory and so, I mean, part of me hated that, you know, part of me wanted her to not have to be that nice. But that's the thing, you know, if you're a woman and you want to be taken seriously, you can't be emotional, you can't shout and yell and cry the way Brett Kavanaugh did.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like all of that was on the other side with Judge Kavanaugh.
You had two completely different sorts of ways of handling the opening statements. On the one hand, you had Dr. Ford, who was composed, as Danielle just said. I mean, she showed some emotion. She wasn't overly prepared, which I thought was really actually good because she came across, I thought, as being very credible. And on the other hand, you had Judge Kavanaugh, who was, you know, righteous indignation, you know, essentially pounding his fist on the table, yelling loud, very upset. And so you really have two different styles of doing it. But my takeaway from what we've seen in these hearings is that the whole process on both sides, frankly, has become so political and so acrimonious. And really, you know, as a lawyer and a United States citizen, someone who, you know, wants the right person to be on the court, that's the real sad part of this whole thing. It's really being handled in a really bad way.
Right. If it was any other workplace where somebody was being considered for a major promotion, this would possibly be, in some broad outline, what would happen, right? You have to hear one story, you hear the other story, and then you try and assess what to do about it, right?
Right. Well, you know, the thing that shocks me is so many of the congressmen on the Justice Committee or the Judicial Committee have backgrounds in law, and they're acting so shocked that it's really difficult to prove sexual harassment or sexual assault cases when that's very well known. And that's why often you look to prove things about a person's character and about a person's credibility. And quite frankly, Brett Kavanaugh has not shown a tremendous amount of character. I know to some of the country he has. You know, they like that he's religious and women signed a letter for him and boys will be boys and it was high school and whatever, but you know, he hasn't answered straightforward questions so much of the time. I mean, he was asked by Klobuchar, you know, have you ever blacked out while drinking? And he turned around and snarled at her, have you?
Right.
She's not trying to get on the Supreme Court.
She had just disclosed that her father had an
but you know, and
alcohol
even besides that, even besides the emotional thing, she's not trying to get on the Supreme Court. It's such entitlement.
He's made lots of comments throughout the hearing that I thought just weren't believable. I mean, I think he said twice, maybe three times, you know, I liked beer then, I like beer now. I mean, what teenager actually likes beer, right? I mean,
really.
they drink it, sure, to get
right.
drunk, but he liked beer. That made no sense. At one point, you know, he was accused of like throwing up, and he said, you know, everyone knows that I have a weak stomach.
Oh, I see.
And so, you know, so these are sorts of things that just don't really ring true to me.
And to be clear, some of there is a he said, she said quality to some of this, right? If you weren't one of the three people in the room, you can't swear to what happened in that room. On the other hand, there is stuff that this is not a court of law, but that could have made its way into a courtroom.
I mean,
right?
and that's why when you asked the question, Errol, about, you know, if this was an interview, this is how it would be done. But really, the whole process, the way they do the 5 minutes back and forth, they brought in somebody from Arizona who obviously did only the questioning on one side, did a couple of questions for the other side, and then maybe on a flight back to Arizona. But the thing is there are plenty of things that would corroborate Dr. Ford's claims.
Such
For
as
instance,
subpoenaing Mark Judge.
you know, you've got Mark Judge, you've got Mark Judge's girlfriend who has some corroborating statements. You have the other two women who say similar things happened to them. You have Judge Kavanaugh's roommate who said that he had a propensity of drinking and being belligerent when he was drinking.
The medical records. You talked about this 6 years ago.
You have the medical records from 2012. You have the polygraph examination that she passed. I can't believe not one of the senators has asked Judge Kavanaugh whether he would submit to a polygraph. I mean, that seems to me like a question that I'd love to see how he would answer that.
Right. It's having lived through and sat through, riveted actually, 27 years ago, those Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. I do remember how it ended. It ended with a confirmation. What do you think is going to happen this time, Danielle?
Well, I see a lot of the same patterns being repeated. You know, Joe Biden at the time was the chairman, and he suppressed witnesses. He suppressed people who were ready and willing to corroborate things about Clarence Thomas. And he just didn't allow them to speak. You know, and they were women who had had firsthand experiences. They would have been extremely credible. And now we have, you know, they're not going to bring Mark Judge to ask him questions. They think the fact that he just wrote a letter is enough. You know, I'm sure Dr. Ford would have loved to have just written a letter and moved on with her life, but she showed up and she answered questions, and I don't really see why Mark Judge can't do the same thing.
Okay, we'll see how all of this works out real quick.
I'm a Republican, and I hope some Republicans vote not to confirm, and he's not confirmed, because as a Republican, I think it would be a mistake for the party to confirm this nominee to the Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you both for your insights. We're going to take a short break here. Coming up, public housing tenants voiced their concerns about our city's housing authority at a special New York One town hall meeting this week. In the Lewis letter, I'll share some highlights with you. Stay with us.